My name is Pete Peterson, and I am the very grateful Dean of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. And it's a delight to welcome you all here to the California Club for the 2019 Spring Patricia Tagliaferri Dean's Distinguished Lecture with Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. This event is made possible because of the foresight and support of one Dr. Gus Tagliaferri, who endowed this lecture series with the main theme of connecting the world's great ideas with current events. Over the last 2 years, we've welcomed amazing speakers and thinkers to our Malibu campus, from Dr. Neil Ferguson, Dr. Charles Murray, and Dennis Prager. But tonight, for the first time, we are bringing this lecture here to downtown Los Angeles, or as someone told me in the foyer area, the belly of the beast. As the Dean of the School of Public Policy, I see my job as not only preparing future leaders for America's government, business sector, and nonprofit sector, but I also see that we have an extremely important role to play, particularly here in Southern California, with bringing speakers of the caliber of Dr. Hanson to places like this place here at the California Club. For too long, Los Angeles and Southern California, especially in the academic world, have squelched off speeches and thinkers and leaders, those like Dr. Hanson or Dr. Ferguson or Dr. Murray, from speaking. But I really do see it as part of our mission at the School of Public Policy to be that beacon of light, to bring what we call viewpoint diversity, not only to Southern California, but also to academia more broadly. I thought about this most specifically when I was dropping my daughter off. My daughter is 7 years old. She sings in a choral program that meets at UCLA. And in dropping her off at the Herb Alpert Music Hall there on the campus of UCLA, I noticed that when I came back to pick her up, they had a lot of video screen monitors up around in the different hallways. And all the monitors were merchandising, they were promoting the counseling services that are available to UCLA students. And I noticed when I was looking through the different types of counseling services that they all had the same website that you could click on and go to. And that website was ucla.edu/coping with the election. Now, at the School of Public Policy, we don't believe we have to cope with this election. We believe at the same time that the 2016 election was something that said quite a bit about America. And unfortunately, the perspectives that we hear so much on America's college campuses are that people like maybe some of you who have supported the president are really being made to squelch or hold your opinions. There was a survey done in 2018 by a nonpartisan group researching 8,000 American voters across the political spectrum. And the question they asked them was, what is the greatest problem facing America's culture today? And the number one point of agreement across the political spectrum was political correctness. The feeling that people had to squelch their opinions because they feared how they were going to be responded to. Now, I believe as an academic leader that our job at Pepperdine is not so much to respond in an aggressive or antagonistic way. Our job is to respond in a thoughtful way. And that's why this lecture series is so important. So please join me in thanking the person who made it possible, Dr. Gus Tagliaferri. One of the points that we drive home to our graduate students on our campus in Malibu is that life is not simple. Life is not easy. And for all the taglines and phrases that we hear in our political life today, life is complex. It is nuanced. This book that Dr. Hanson has written and we'll talk about here with you this evening, though called The Case for Trump, makes a very nuanced argument for the importance of this president for this point in time. It's important as policy schools, in particular, those who are sending people out into the political world, that they understand that certain times call for certain kinds of people. And only a world-class historian can bring that kind of perspective, not an armchair pundit. And certainly not someone who hasn't studied our history, not only American history, but world history. And so that's why I was so excited to welcome back Dr. Victor Davis Hanson to give tonight's Patricia Tagliaferri lecture. What he has done in this book, and you will hear, is to take a very important historical event that we've all lived through in this 2016 election and place it into a historical context that I will wager to say you have never heard before, but one that really needs to be heard more and more. That's the kind of work that we do at the graduate policy schools. We take history seriously, and we take people like President Trump seriously, and we take people like Dr. Victor Davis Hanson seriously. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our 2019 Patricia Tagliaferri Dean's Distinguished Lecturer, the Martin and Illie Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction and a nice crowd, large. I felt the same way you did about the belly of the beast as I was driving up the 99, the I-5, and sort of apocalypse now upriver. I thought I'd speak for about 35 minutes, then we'll have some questions if you'd like. There was a lot of ways to explain the 2006 election, and you had to come up with some exegesis because Trump was the first person we've ever elected or ever nominated without political or military experience. And one of the things I think was strange about it is that the so-called deplorables, irredeemables, what Obama called the clingers, John McCain called the crazies, you may know them as the Tea Party, the Reagan Democrats, the silent majority, the Tea Party people. The message was originally tailored to them, and then they sort of absorbed the Republican Party and all of you, even if you were not of the same class. And what was the message? Their message was that globalization's a great thing. It's brought eyeglasses to the Amazon and antibiotics to the Sudan. It's wonderful, but it was asymmetrical in the United States. If you had muscular labor or you produced real things, anything that could be duplicated or Xeroxed overseas, it was. And then people, like most of us in the room, who had what we do could not be Xeroxed. We had suddenly a market or an audience of 7 billion people. Or as a person who was laid off from the upright harvester plant in Selma, when I was growing up, the canneries, the Fruhoff trailer, whatever the manufacturing or food processing was, there were only 4 of us out of our high school, rural school that went to college. And then why would you when the wages were so high? They thought that we were crazy when you could go right at 18 and buy a house at 22 and have 3 kids and, you know, the whole thing by the time you're 30. There was no Pajama Boy or Life of Julia in those days because you didn't need it. So, as one person at Upright Harvester said to me, well, how would you like it if a guy from Korea wrote your columns? And I said, well, they can't. He said, oh, they can't, can they? What do you get for them? And I explained. He said, well, why can't they do it for a quarter, just like this harvester plant that went overseas? And what makes you exempt? And what I'm getting at is a lot of people in the conservative Republican establishment accepted that argument, almost as if people had taken opiates and driven out industry rather than industry leaving for a variety of reasons and they taking opiates. They reversed cause and effect. And the more that people started to voice those complaints about the interior of the country, the more people that didn't live there started to say, you know what, that argument doesn't apply to me in particular, but it does in the abstract. Because what they're saying is an elite, a liberal progressive elite, have created a new party of very poor and very wealthy, and they've turned their backs on the middle class. And their signature ideology is, we are never subject to the ramifications of our own ideology. We don't like teachers. We do not like charter schools. We love teachers' unions, but our kids get to go to private school. That's for the deplorables or the inner city kids. We don't believe in water transfers. We want to let 50 million acre feet go out to the ocean, but by God, we have to have that hetchy water for San Francisco. We believe in 28 cents a kilowatt so that we are very sparse in our use. Electricity is very expensive and very careful in how we use it, but we live on the coast. We don't live in Fresno where it's 110 and Hispanic people are cramming into Walmart for the free air conditioning. And so that was the idea. And so people started to see the deplorable argument, and they said, I can be a millionaire, but this is how they operate. Mark Zuckerberg's got a big estate, and he's lecturing us, that has a big wall on it, and he's lecturing us about walls. It doesn't make any sense. And people got angrier and angrier about it. They say there's not a problem with crime or homelessness, but they had the estates that shielded them from the ramifications of progressive social policy. I found that I was asked to speak not too long ago in Pacific Heights in San Francisco, and all of a sudden when I thought, I'm going to walk up from the Tenderloin. I got an hour, and I noticed as I got higher up, there were fewer homeless, and there were no police, but there were private security people who stopped me. And I thought, wow, I'd be for homelessness too if I didn't live down on Market Street. And that's sort of, when you look at the new Democratic Party, that's what it is. It's people who pontificate and sermonize and are self-righteous in the abstract, and Trump saw that. And that was the great irony, wasn't it? Because he was a billionaire, a Manhattanite. And so he tailored a message that 16 brilliant candidates, and they were much better than we'd seen before in a Republican primary, who had much more experience, a Scott Walker, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, a very successful CEO, Carly Fiorina, Ben Carson, every walk of life, diversity, everything, and yet they could not come up with a strategy to win the Electoral College, or at least in the voters of that Electoral College in the primaries. And Trump took a traditional Republican message. After all, he was for tax cuts, he was for deregulation, he was for more energy development, he was for strict constructionist judges, he was for the restoration of deterrence abroad, he was for increased defense budget. But then so was Jeb Bush, and so was Marco Rubio. So he tweaked it with this theme that we talked about, globalization and the asymmetrical effects on people who were really suffering in the interior, and by extension, how that ideology affects all of us. And he said, if you're going to go overseas and you're going to get into an optional military engagement, make sure you translate tactical victory in the ground. Otherwise, Afghanistan's not going to result in strategic resolution in a cost-benefit analysis. Like it or not, nobody from the Council on Foreign Relations, none of the neocons, of which I have supported, could make a counter-argument. So being Trump, he personalized it. I'm not going to send your son over to blank, blank country for somebody's, pie-in-the-sky theory. And then he said, you don't have sovereignty if you don't have a border. Jeb Bush was saying illegal immigration is an act of love. But Trump was saying a lot of you live in areas that are impacted when you bring millions of people and they're neither legal, and that the admission is not based on meritocratic criteria but proximity to the borders, and it's not diverse, and it's not measured, and you, the host, no longer believe in intermarriage and the melting pot and integration and assimilation, you have the menu for catastrophe. Everybody laughed at him, said he was a nativist, and of course Trump being Trump, to make that message was pretty tough in his nomenclature and vocabulary. But that was another issue that none of the Republicans wanted to touch, and it resonated with the deplorables. Then third, he said, deindustrialization is not written in stone. If you look at all the criteria, the United States should be number one. It's got the best higher educational system in the world. Its energy, natural gas especially now from fracking, is cheaper than Germany or Japan. It's centrally located. There was a reason why we supplied about 80% of the vehicles in World War II. In other countries, we supplied 95% of the aviation fuel of the entire war. We built more ships at the end of the war than all the navies put together, and we haven't changed. We're the same people. We just have policies that have been asymmetrical. Everybody said, well, and I was at the Hoover Institution, and I thought, now this is gonna get interesting, because if you're going to stop China's $600 billion trade, are you gonna address the asymmetrical patterns of a $70 billion trade surplus with Germany or $69 billion with Japan? You're gonna have to mention the T word, tariff. And if you do that, you're gonna be toast in the Republican Party. He did. And that was the only quiver you have if you want to address that asymmetry. Everybody said that he'll never get the nomination if he did, and he did. And then finally, he had another message, and that was China. China, we were all told, was fated to take over the world. Billion people, they're market capitalism. If you're Tom Friedman, you go over there and you say, wow, they've got high-speed rail, their airports, they've hit on authoritarian capitalism that has a green tweak is wonderful. And none of us believe that. We all said that the history of authoritarian societies is they reach a point, whether it's Mussolini's at Italy or Franco's Spain, they hit a point and then they become themselves over-bureaucratic, crony capitalism, and they're not as efficient as an open and transparent society. And Trump said we can beat these people, beat, of course, in Trumpian vocabulary. It's a binary world in his way. We can beat these people if we all hang together and we treat them the way they treat us. And the Republican Party had said almost, well, we believe in Sermon on the Mount. We turn the other cheek. And Trump said, no, we don't. They're out to cheat us. And that was a message that appealed to people in the Midwest, and that's where the election was going to be decided. It wasn't going to be decided here. It wasn't going to be decided in Texas. Everybody forgot that all these people who were the losers of globalizations were the winners of the Electoral College. I'm talking about Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, North Carolina, and to extent Florida. Nothing else mattered. Why didn't those geniuses know that? They didn't understand that. And furthermore, when Trump went to those rallies, you could see what he was doing. If you tuned out all of the vituperative attacks on him, he was basically saying to the country, the people in this hallway are the 4 or 6 million who didn't show up to vote for John McCain. They didn't show up to vote for Mitt Romney. And if they all come out, we can take this blue state, blue wall, and we can flip it. Not by much, but we don't need to. 80,000, 90,000. I don't care if California votes me, votes 4 million in front of Hillary Clinton. I don't care if I lose the popular vote. We can win with these people. And so everybody said, oh, wow, Trump's got these Neanderthal rallies, same old thing, marathon, Stalin-like speeches. But he was bringing people out of the woodwork, and he flipped those. I have a friend who likes to tease me, and every time he sends me an email, about once a month, he sends me the video download of Rachel Maddow on election night, and he keeps always saying, tell me that you didn't download it this time. And every time I get it, I read it again, and I forgot. I mean, I look at it, she's in tears. It's disbelief. It's like the world turned upside down after the Battle of Yorktown if you're a Tory. It's amazing. So he did that, and he took a traditional message and then he tweaked it as well by telling the Republican Party, I'm not Mitt Romney. I'm not going to give a pass to Candy Crawley when she hijacks the debate. I'm not John McCain that's going to rule out Reverend Wright. I'm not Bob Dole. I'm not George W. Bush, who's going to say in 2006, I got to be presidential. I cannot respond to Michael Moore, etc. If you want to fight and want to get down in the wrestling ring, you're going to get dirty, but I've already been there in real life in World Wrestling Federation, and I don't care. And that message to a lot of Republicans, many of us in this room maybe, who otherwise were turned off by his personality, thought, you know what, I'm so exasperated, I want to cut this leash, let the pit bull go in the right direction, and do to them what they're doing to us. As I mentioned to another group, he was sort of Lee Atwater come back alive that had saved George H.W. Bush's campaign against Dukakis. Dukakis came out of the '88 Democratic Convention with an 18-point lead. And when they got done with Boston Harbor, Willie Harbor, it was pretty tough stuff. Lee Atwater apologized later, but they won. And after that, people said, we never want to win like that again. And they didn't. They didn't really win, except for George W. Bush. And so that was a message that people resonated. They wanted somebody to say, enough is enough. They wanted a Clinton version of the a Trump version of the war room that Clinton had used. And they didn't want, you know, John McCain type of, let's lose nobly, rather than win ugly. They wanted to win ugly, and they did. And then second, just when we thought that this was going to be a really dirty candidate, and we had all of this sleaze on MSNBC and CNN about his marriages and Access Hollywood, et cetera, it was not so simple, because he started touring the country and he started sounding empathetic. Our miners, our vets, our farmers. I never heard Mitt Romney say our once. Maybe it was a cheap trick, but he was able to radiate empathy. When he said the other night, they're all at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I'd rather be with you any day of the week. I mean, that was the message he gave. People said, wow, how can he be empathetic? He's Donald Trump. And then as I said earlier, every time I hear Barack Obama speak, his accent depends on the audience in which he's speaking. Hillary goes south of the Mason-Dixon line, I'm so tired today. Joe Biden goes to an African-American audience, they're going to put you in chains. And everybody got sick of that. John Kerry in his camouflage, Mike Dukakis in his tank. Even the Republican primary candidates were all wearing flannel and jeans and Caterpillar caps when they went to the Indiana State Fair. Trump, he shows up with that ridiculous tie, that ridiculous suit, ridiculous shoes, ridiculous tan, ridiculous hair, and the Queen's accent. So when I talk to people, I'd always talk to people. I'd say, how did what did he do when he showed up in Tulare, California, or Michigan, when he came to Clinton? Well, they'd always say, well, the guy was the same thing. He had that grating Queen's voice. He was completely overdressed out of, you know, everybody was casual. He had a suit, a tie on. Tie was too long. The hair was... And so what I'm getting at is he radiated authenticity, and people wanted that, and the fact that he was able to do it with an empathy, and let's face it, he did not want to play by the Marquess of Queensberry rules. And that, with this tweaking of a traditional Orthodox message on 4 or 5 key issues, created the Trump factor. No need to recount what he's done. I mean, really, we haven't seen an economy like this since Reagan. Every time you hear of a new statistic, it's always with the adjective unexpectedly. Unexpectedly, growth went 3.2. Unexpectedly, record minority group. Unexpectedly, record natural gas production. Unexpectedly, 3 million barrels more of oil since he was elected. Unexpectedly, his judicial appointments are not like David Souter or Harriet Meyer's nomination. Unexpectedly. So he's been very successful, and you know in your own experience and your circle of friends and associates, maybe even neutrals and enemies, that all of the people that said that they were not going to vote for him, although they were conservative in 2016, most of them are going to vote for him in 2020, and all the people that did vote for him in 2016, you don't find very many that said, I just can't do it this time around. He tweets too much. No, it's like, well, he's our SOB, and so we're going to vote for him. And I want to talk, second part, why do they hate him so much? I mean, you watch the Barr hearings. What drives a Cory Booker or Kamala Harris or a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren to hate this person so much to the point of being self-destructive? You know, I have a daughter who didn't vote for him the first time, and she said, now he's going after Elizabeth Warren. And I don't like Elizabeth Warren, but he's calling her Pocahontas. And I started laughing. And I said, could I try a joke with you? And I said, what did he say about Stormy Daniels? And she said, I'm not going to say it. And I said, go ahead. And he goes, horse mouth. And she started laughing. So I said, it's not just cruel, he is cruel, but it's funny. And so when he said little Marco, I turned to my wife and I said, I thought he was 6'5". He's not. And when he said low energy Jeb, I like Jeb Bush, but I thought, wow, he is low energy. And so he had that ability to connect with people in a very, and that drove people crazy, not because he was crude and calling people names in sandbox style, but they were accurate. And and they stuck. The other day, I said to my wife, I guess he was in doubt whether to say creepy or sleepy Joe Biden. And she said, did you see the interview with Joe Biden and his wife? And I said, no. And then so I went and got it. Well, Joe Biden lets his wife answer all the questions. He's very sleepy. And I thought, wow, who would ever think that Joe Biden is sleepy? But the point I'm getting at is that he's a much more complex person than just somebody who's crass and callous. That drives people crazy. The second thing is, systematically, he literally doesn't sleep. He's got a lidless eye. He goes to bed at midnight thinking, I didn't do enough to overturn Barack Obama's agenda, and he gets up 4 hours later and said, I'm going to do all I can to overturn Barack Obama's agenda. Systematically. Whether it's his attitude is, for every liberal progressive judge that Obama appointed for life, I'm going to appoint 2 conservatives. For every acre of federal lands or Anwar he put off natural gas exploration, I'm going to put on 2. For every dollar in the defense budget he cut, I'm going to add 2. That was his attitude. And where it came from was some primordial urge out of the Manhattan real estate market, obviously, but he is systematically overturning Obama, and that drives people crazy because, after all, the night of the election, the New York Times Analytics said we have one data firm that said 1% for Trump success, 6%, and remember Nate Silver, the guru? He said Trump has a 26% chance of winning. They almost tarred and feathered him for saying that. And so they assumed 16 years of the progressive project would have ended America as we thought. It would be much more transformative than the New Deal. And yet it didn't happen. So there was this furor that led to, well, who's to blame? And, well, after about a nanosecond of blaming Hillary, the real culprit, they went into Russian collusion, et cetera, that's still going on. That was another reason people hate him. A third is, though, that if he succeeds, what does that say about the criteria or the credentials to succeed? Reminds me of William Tecumseh Sherman was considered crazy during the Civil War. He had a mental breakdown, and he said some crazy things at the time. When people were saying the Union was going to crush the Confederacy, he said, well, we're going to have to kill about 300,000 of them, and it's going to cost us about 300,000. It should take about 5 years. They declared him insane. It was exactly what happened. And we have these figures, you know, Curtis LeMay or George Patton, and they're repulsive some way, but yet there's something about them that we can't quite put away. And Trump, the idea was that, I think Henry Kissinger said it best, every once in a while we need a disruptor. So he came in and said to the establishment, you have all the credentials, you went to the right schools, Harvard, Yale, you got your law degree, Council on Foreign Relations, all the things that are very impressive. We all respect that. And yet, how did North Korea get a missile with a nuclear warhead pointed at us after 6-party talks, agreed framework, strategic patience? Why in the world are not these wealthy countries living up to their obligations of 2% GDP? NATO's, what happened? Obama said they were free riders. Trump said they were worthless and we're going to get out of NATO, and he got 6 of them to pay. That's the way he was looking at it. And he said, we all thought that our elite shouldn't have signed the Iran deal. We shouldn't have got into that crazy Paris Climate Accord. It was past time to recognize the Golan Heights. We should remove the embassy to Jerusalem. He just did it. And nobody else would have done it because they would have been saying, on the one hand, on the other hand. You can't do this. I'm not arguing for recklessness or even ignorance of our institutions, but at certain times, as Kissinger said, you do need somebody like that 2004 Apple commercial where the female athlete runs in They're all looking at Big Brother on the screen, and she throws that hammer and shatters it. That was what Apple was trying to say it was doing, I guess, to Microsoft or something. But that's what he did. And finally, let's be honest, there was a class element to it, that he didn't sound like he was from Manhattan or even the Bronx or Brooklyn. He sounded like he was from Queens, because he was. And he didn't dress right. And he had a whole array of people that were kind of creepy, whether it was Scaramucci or Omarosa. Or, you know, I had known Steve Bannon. I really liked him. But I remember he used to come up and he did these documentaries. And he had a lot of talking heads, and every once in a while he'd come to the Hoover Institution, go up to the top of the tower at my office, and I can remember you had to sign in, and a woman called me, a very sweet woman at the desk, and said, Victor, there's a guy from a motorcycle gang, and he's out here with a leather jacket, and he hasn't shaved in a week, and he smells, and he has long, oily hair, and he's got his whole biker gang with him, and they've got cameras. And what's happening? I said, that's Steve Bannon and his crew, let him up. And so, and there was something about that that drove people crazy. You know, it was not the Bush coterie. And there was a class element that people thought, you know what, he's on the D or F list, on party list. We don't want him around. So I think all of those explain why people hated him. I'd like to finish, though, with a couple of observations about 2020. And as I said earlier to a group, as historians, we have to look at what other candidates have done. What usually sinks a candidate either denies him re-election, like George H.W. Bush or Jimmy Carter, or destroys his second term, like LBJ or George W. Bush. You know what they are. They're a sudden economic downturn. I don't think that we'll see a severe recession before the 2020. Every time we're told that the recession's looming, the job figures are better, and he's even doing more deregulation, more energy development. And I was in Houston this weekend speaking to a group, and I couldn't believe what they were telling me about Houston being the world's energy exporter. It's just incredible, the amount of activity that's happened just the last 2 years. Or there's an unpopular war, a Vietnam that sunk LBJ, or Iraq that left, or Korea that left Truman, and George W. Bush going out, very unpopular. Or there's a scandal, something like the collusion, and there was no collusion. So I don't see any of those three happening. So then you look at traditional criteria. How did he do in his first midterms? He did better than Obama and Clinton. Clinton lost 53 seats, Obama 62, Clinton 8 Senate seats, Obama 6 in 2012. Trump lost 39, maybe 40 House seats, and he picked up 2 Senate seats. He's polling in the 5th month of his presidency exactly where Obama was, about 1 point less than Clinton. Clinton demolished Bob Dole in the Electoral College, as you remember, in '96, and Obama did the same to Mitt Romney, as you remember, in 2012. So it looks like it's his election to win or lose. Then you don't really run in a vacuum. We don't vote on whether we like a president or not. We vote whether he's better than the alternative. Sometimes we have, maybe we have, I hope we've had good and better candidates, but usually we have bad ones and worse ones. And so we're going to vote for Trump compared to what exactly? And this is not the Democratic Party of my parents. I grew up in a Democratic household. It's not the Democratic Party of Bill Clinton. It's not even the Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton. This is a radical, progressive, socialist party. And any candidate to get through it, and by that I mean enter the primaries, do the debates, and survive the Democratic convention, is going to have a lot of smelly albatrosses around their neck. And they consist of, but are not limited to, abolishing student debt. So a guy in a forklift who went to work in a muscular job at 18 is supposed to pay for some hipster that takes 3 units in Manhattan or San Francisco every once in a while and runs up $200,000 in debt. I don't think that's going to be a winning message. Or Medicare for everybody. So a lot of you you wait your entire life until you turn 62 or 65 or whatever it is, and then you think you get a coverage, and then you discover it goes for everybody. You can just fly into the United States, you can be a resident, and you get the same thing. That's not going to go over. Abolishing ICE, we're going to have the mother of all caravans this summer, is not a winning issue. Abolishing the Electoral College is not a winning issue. Abolishing all student debt is not a winning issue. Either is, I guess we would call it reparations. How are you going to take money from somebody who works at 7-Eleven and give it to Jay-Z and Oprah? It's not going to work. Or why would you say to Kamala Harris, well, your family were slave owners in the Caribbean, and we're going to give you money because we feel really bad about it? That's not going to happen. There's no way it's going to happen. Joe Biden told us that, remember, when he dismissed in his earlier incarnation reparations in the 70s. And I don't think that, whatever your views are on abortion, I think you're queasy about partial birth abortion, and you realize that when the baby leaves the birth canal, and there's about 7,000, I'm told, a year that happens, they are individuals with protection under the U.S. Constitution. We're not going to tolerate infanticide in the United States. And another key issue is whether the Democrat, when I grew up, Jew hatred was confined to Klansmen and Nazis. Over the last 40 years, anti-Semitism is the property of the left on campus, partly because of changing demography, partly because of the so-called Palestinian issue. Whatever the reason is, if you look at all of the major figures that are in the Progressive Party, whether it's Representative Omar, who basically said that Jews have inordinate offense, the two Benjamins, or you have Representative Tlaib, who said that we should cut all aid to Israel because they don't represent the only democracy in the Middle East. They don't represent our values. Or AOC, who defended both of them. Or everybody kissing the ring at Al Sharpton that said, if the Jews want a war, put on your alma, you put on this or that, their garb, and come over to my house and let's get it on. Or Jesse Jackson, who weighed in, who said, Town. Or Reverend Wright, who said, dim Jews don't let me talk to Obama anymore. Or the New York Times that ran an article right out of Der Stürmer, Mr. Stryker's Nazi. Remember, we hang that guy after the Nuremberg trials who printed those cartoons, the Nazi apologist. And so the New York Times publishes that, and then it explains how it publishes it without an apology. Then it apologized, then it does another one, Netanyahu, with a selfie as if he's blind. And so that's that party. And that's going to be what Trump is going to run against. And so people are going to say, well, I like the economy, I like the restoration of deterrence. There's no finer foreign policy team than John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. Betsy DeVos is restoring the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment to campus. This is great, and but the tweets bother me, but not as much as Representative Omar, and not as much as Al Sharpton, and not as much as Bernie Sanders' socialist agenda for me. And I think that's going to be determinative. If you try to sum up Trump as a historical figure, and in the book, I said he was a tragic hero, and people got kind of angry at that, especially the never-Trumpers. But tragic heroes are not necessarily, as I said, they're not Christian-like figures. They're not magnanimous necessarily. If you read Sophocles' play, The Ajax, it's right out, I wish you would read it. It's a story about Donald Trump. He says, I'm the best fighter at Troy after Achilles was killed. And I did everything for you. And they give me no credit. This is terrible. Why don't they give me credit? And then you want to say, because you're Ajax, and you're crude, and you're ungainly. And he says, well, the deep state, Menelaus and Odysseus and Agamemnon, they rig everything. It's not fair to me. And then that's the entire play. Sort of what Trump doesn't get it, that he keeps saying, you know, if I was JFK, Melania would be treated by Jackie, and you want to say, yeah, but you're not JFK. And he rages all day long about the unfairness. He said the other day, if Obama had 3% GDP, you would all be worshiping. And then he said, and Larry Summers said you would never have 3%. And Krugman said that the stock market would crash. And Obama said you need a magic wand. And why don't they give, they don't give him any credit. Well, they're never going to give him credit. That's the role of a tragic hero in classical tragedy. But you know him, I hope you know him, because I know the young generation doesn't watch Westerns anymore, but you all remember Shane. Come back, Shane. And Shane comes into the community, and the poor sodbusters talk a great game about the cattle barons, or they're going to someday do something to them. And then they see this guy Shane, and they start to think, wow, he might be somebody we could use temporarily. And then one of them says, well, Shane, how do you know the Jack Palance figure? How do you know him? I don't like that about you. And then Shane just sort of looks at him, thinking in his head, you don't like that about me, but not enough to not use me when you need it in extremis. So then when he kills the bad people, people are shocked that they had to have a gunfight, and he says, you can't break the mold, and he takes off. And the same theme is in every John Ford Western. Remember The Searchers, Ethan Allen, John Wayne. My gosh, nobody can find Natalie Wood, but John Wayne we think might kill her when he finds her. He didn't, but then he walks out the door and we say, well, it's been nice knowing you. Take care of it. Just don't come back. Same thing with The Magnificent Seven. At the end of that great movie, you remember the village elder says, if they knew how to, they would thank you because they really are happy you're here. And Steve McQueen says, well, they're happy we're leaving too. And then Yul Brynner says, we lose, we always lose. You get the theme, and the tragic hero's point is that from time to time in a society, and I mentioned Sherman, and I mentioned Patton, and I mentioned Curtis LeMay, I mentioned Matthew Ridgway, we have these figures that in orthodox times we would not turn to. But we reach a period of stasis where conventional means, I'm not talking about authoritarian dictators or communism or Nazis, I'm talking about people who work within the democratic parameters, but they're eccentric or they're unorthodox. We want them to come in and address things that we want to do because we feel that they're not invested in the system, and they're not afraid to be pilloried or caricatured, or they may not like it, but they're not afraid. They keep getting up every morning. I don't know how Trump at 72 with that diet and that physique and that lack of exercise. I always say to my wife when I get up, I said, is he still alive this morning? Because I have a good congressman friend, and I said to him, so you saw Donald Trump the other day? And he said, yes, I did. And I said, so those are all lies about his diet? And he said, no. He gave us a hamburger, and then he offered us a Haagen-Dazs, and he took 2 and I got 1. And then I left at 11:30, and I got a tweet on my phone at 4 a.m. So I worry about that. I think everybody is these supernatural energy, and we don't know how long that's sustainable. But the point is that as this tragic hero becomes more successful, and in our terms of the presidency, whether the more successful the economy is, the more stable overseas, the more that our allies start to address some imbalances, then the more we have the luxury or the margin of error to say, you know what, I just don't like that tweet. So what I'm getting at is I think Trump will be re-elected. I think he has the ability to make a lot of overdue changes that he's already done. But I don't think he's going to be going to funerals with ex-presidents, and I don't think the next president's going to call up Donald Trump for advice. And that's to our advantage in a weird way that they won't. Thank you very much.
Well, it's an odd thing when you plan an event and you get to the event and you hope people don't show up because we way over-registered for this. But I think what it tells me is we need to be doing more of these. Anybody? Before we conclude, and we've got some coffee and refreshments just outside the door here, I want to recognize a few people. First, again, the person who made this all possible, someone who is a mentor to me and friend, and someone who is just such a great encouragement, Dr. Gus Tagliaferri. Please join me in thanking him. Also, I want to thank the Cal Club member and the president of our Board of Advisors who made this event here possible tonight, Joe Chizik. So again, from our little outpost overlooking the Pacific, it's important for us at the School of Public Policy not just to be preparing the next generation of public leaders, but to be doing events like this, because nobody else is going to, at least not in Los Angeles. And so we are going to continue to be that beacon to support and bring speakers like Dr. Victor Davis Hanson to tell inconvenient truths about where we are as a state and as a nation, but always grounded in an intellectual foundation, founding principles, free markets, and religious liberty, because that's what we do at Pepperdine, and that's what we do at the School of Public Policy. So if you would like to be a part of that, I want our Matt Cutler to stand up. Matt is waving in the back. If you would like to be on our email list, if you would like to speak with anybody about how you might support this rather unique graduate school, if you have a graduating senior in undergraduate school and you're like, boy, you know, after 4 years at Cal, I think they could use 20 months in Malibu. You know, maybe a little deprogramming might be in order. Please let me know. Again, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This has been such a great evening, the first time that we've taken this lecture from our Malibu campus here to downtown Los Angeles. I look forward to being with you again at another night in a bigger room here in Los Angeles. Please travel home safely. God bless you all, and good night.